going. I think. Yes. So, before we begin, if you don't know what pedagogy is, it's education, the study of how education works, basically the methodology behind it. This is not to be confused with educational psychology, which is like a whole other thing. I tend to believe that educational psychology can only go so far, and it tends to be very individualized. Still important, of course, but not what I'm talking about here. Before I get into that, some preliminary notes. I've gotten some hate comments already. Well, actually, one hate comment. It was on... Where was it? I want to respond to it because I feel like it's somewhat important. It was on my stream about the what if autist video. Bloody hell, where is it? I need to find it on my phone. For some reason, comments disappear when I'm on here. Oh, there we go. There it is. So Michael, rights reserved. That's the actual name. He says, Maduro is popular. What the fuck are you saying? I can't say the next word because it's the N word. Do you live in a hole or something? So I mean, very analytical comment here. Very well thought out. So I replied, perhaps if the Venezuelan opposition wouldn't have boycotted the election, which was overseen by international non-partisan watchdog organizations, this would not be true. However, they did boycott that election. If the opposition is so confident in their popular support, why would they boycott an election which they knew would be overseen by these neutral observers? I think that speaks for itself, but I just kind of wanted to address that because this is going to happen, obviously. People seem to have this idea of Venezuela as if it's somehow as bad as North Korea or something, where there's just no freedom of press, or that it's just some sort of complete autocracy or something like that. It could not be further from the truth. Not only does Venezuela have free press, it's actually the most popular press in Venezuela tends to be anti-Maduro press. It tends to be a liberal press, which is kind of the funny part. But that's not really what he's talking about. I'm kind of getting off track. Maduro is popular. Yeah, Maduro is popular. I think what I say completely stands on its own. I think that it's been demonstrated through many elections which have been overseen by international watchdogs that Maduro has popular support. It is dwindling. I will give you that. In significant numbers, it is dwindling. However, if I look at the Venezuelan election in 2020, most recent one. This is from Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is good for stuff like this. Just statistics, election stuff. It's good for that. It's one thing where it's useful. So, voter turnout is 30%. Not great. PSUV, which is United Socialist Party of Venezuela, is Maduro's party. 62% of that vote. Now, pretty much everyone else got like less than 10%. Yeah, the runner-up got 6.92%. Even if they had that terrible turnout, because most people boycotted the elections who didn't like Maduro, even if they had such a bad turnout, that's a very steep margin between the winner and the runner-up. I think it follows logically that Maduro is a popular leader. I don't know. Let me know what you think. But that's not what this is about. We have our first viewer chat. I don't know how to talk like a streamer. I gotta learn this. It's a dab. I could have gone my entire time on YouTube without seeing this emoji. I didn't know this existed, and I'm uncomfortable. I'm just gonna send back a dab. There we go. Okay, let's get down to business. So, a little document here. I'm just gonna kind of give like a little rundown. My face is okay now. Not too bad. It's still got like bruising. I don't know if you can see that. I'm doing okay, basically. So, I'll just sort of read this out. Now, I want to become a teacher. That's my big thing. Most people who watch me probably know that. That's what I want to do with my life. It's a long ways through school, but I'm getting through it. Eventually, you know. So, I wrote a little sort of preface here. I said something I think gets little attention is the extent to which educational institutions, can engage students and rationalize them, even being within them. This sounds like a relatively simple question. However, since the widespread proliferation of internet access, it is much more important to consider. The difficulty of divorce, for instance, that the hitherto main socializing institution, the family, diminishes in its power to develop children healthily, is reflected much more significantly in this respect that educational institutions now fight an uphill battle in developing young minds against the influences of popular culture. This is not to say that the influences of popular culture are necessarily always negative, although they often are, rather that the cohesive forms of socialization, such as the family and educational institutions, must reckon with this increasingly undeniable fact. So, the reason that I call this progressive pedagogy and not Marxist pedagogy or proletarian pedagogy, any of these buzzwords, is because it's not strictly speaking Marxist. Now, I'd say that a lot of what I'm trying to do here is informed by Marxist methodology, but it has very little to do with the politics of Marxism. It has something to do with the economics of Marxism. I talk about commodity production and how education, at least where I am, because I'm mostly talking about Anglo-America, that it tends to be more so a form of commodity production than education. That's basically the main thesis. And as a result, educational institutions have really failed in recent years, I think, to properly engage students. Student engagement is something that I talk to a lot of teachers. I know a lot of teachers, and they don't seem to be incredibly concerned about it. And it's not their fault that they're not concerned about it. When you're coming up in, like I am right now, in education courses in universities, this is never really something that comes into the textbook, and it's never really something that comes out in any course material. Now, it may in sort of some offhand ways, but it's not ultimately the main goal. What I want to suggest with progressive pedagogy, I mentioned the proliferation of internet access. This is something I think is being completely ignored. I think that educational models, educational systems, other than in very nominal ways, have really sort of ignored the information age. and its consequences. The information age has dire consequences on the development of young people. If you are around my age, I really don't need to tell you that. Particularly, I won't get into it, but particularly in terms of online pornography, the way that sexuality is treated, the way that it plays on our self-esteem. There's probably nothing I can tell you in that regard that would really be all that thought-provoking or innovative or groundbreaking. Everyone knows that the internet does these things. The case that I'm trying to make is that we need to be progressive in our pedagogy. We need to basically acknowledge realities, new systemic realities, which are coming about because of the consequences of the internet age and of techno-capitalism. Techno-capitalism is a big part of it. That we need to acknowledge these realities and work against them. Because hitherto, even now, I mean, they still don't. I've not really seen much effort from educators concerning combating this sort of hold that popular culture and the internet has on young children. And I worry significantly for the next generation because of this. This is why I want to be a teacher. So yeah, it is progressive pedagogy. However, it is dialectical in a Marxist sense. My thesis here is basically that there is an inherent antagonism between both educational professionals and those who own them, those who pay them. That is, in most places, governments, but in private schools, it could be private employers. In terms of wages, there's that antagonism, but it also coincides with the interests of students versus actual education. Now, I'll go into the first thing a bit. I'll talk about how teachers are treated where I live, because it's not great. It's really not. Now, teachers in Alberta, Canada, that's... No, it's this side. It's that... No, that's the U.S. That country right there. Teachers in Alberta, since, I believe, 2002, have seen a net decrease in wages of about 10%. And this has coincided with an increase in cost of living. That's from the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, to be clear, for all you economics nerds out there, of about 10%. I would say inflation, but CPI and inflation not necessarily the same on this scale. Caitlin, I know that you are trying to text me. Now is not the time. I know that you're watching. Anyways, where was I before I was rudely interrupted? Now this is a significant problem. I don't think I need to explain why. This is not to mention that our most recent provincial government has overseen the cutting of a lot of funding from elementary schools in particular, and really all academic institutions. We've seen quite a few layoffs in the education sector, and it seems to be only getting worse, so I love living here. Now, the other thing, which is kind of the more important pedagogical part of this whole thing, is students versus the institutions. Now, I want to make clear here that I'm not criticizing teachers for this. I'm not saying that it's their fault. I'm not saying that there's some moral failure of teachers, that they're just not teaching well enough or things like that. My argument is that they are made to follow this pedagogical imperative of education as commodity production. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a certain thing in Marxism and critical theory known as reification. It's really more of a philosophical term, not exclusively Marxist, but reification is essentially, you can make the same case for what Marx called Warenfetischismus, commodity fetishism. It's really fun to say in German, Warenfetischismus. Yeah, it makes it sound a lot worse. It's similar to that in the sense that education, rather than its expressed purpose, because education's expressed purpose is to educate the next generation, carry on in a linear fashion the information that existed in the previous generation, make sure that you have a good efficiency in taking this information and putting it into the minds of the next generation and continuing to build upon it so that they can continue to build upon it themselves. I don't think you can really argue that that's the purpose of education. At least from a societal perspective and from a historical perspective, that is the purpose of education. My argument is that capitalism and the capitalist mode of production have necessarily reified this into a form of commodity production and completely detracted from this pedagogical imperative, from this natural pedagogical imperative of carrying on information to the next generation. I hate saying that. I hate how that rhymes. And I'm going to go more into detail in later streams, don't worry. But that's one of the tenets of what I'm trying to do here. I've already spoken about information and technology. Techno-capitalism, for example, has created the next generation of people. I mean, I was born in 1999. I'm among the first people to be basically raised on the internet. And I can see in many of my peers that this has extremely problematic consequences. Namely, again, I don't need to tell you, but Instagram and the way that it treats women's beauty standards, pornography and how it treats women's beauty standards, pornography in how it conveys to young men what sexuality ought to be about, and how it ought to work, and what sort of things you should expect. These sorts of things are never really addressed in any sex ed class, for example. And I think that it's causing tremendous problems. And I think all you really need to do to prove me right is, just be a woman on Tinder or something. You'll see that firsthand. Men have become, well, it's not like they haven't always been, but have become more so entitled to sexuality, entitled to relationships, creating unhealthy relationships, toxic relationships with their peers, not just women, but also other men. This is something that desperately needs to be addressed. So, Did I miss anything? So it's dialectical in the sense that, yes, there's an antagonism between the will of institutions and those who oversee those institutions, educators, and to engage their students, to keep their students believing in these institutions as the main socializing and developing factor within their lives. There's an antagonism between that and the will of the market. I'm not one of these people who, there's a lot of people who advocate for homeschooling, for example, which I'm not against, but there's a lot of people who advocate for homeschooling on the basis that it just turns people into obedient workers or obedient slaves, any sort of distasteful remark. And they typically blame teachers for it, that teachers aren't teaching good enough for it, or they blame the curriculum. For example, in Alberta as well, there's been a new curriculum proposed for K to 6, was it? I believe K to 6. And it's just a mess. Maybe I'll do a whole stream looking at it. I haven't read the whole thing, but there's some things in there that are really interesting. But people tend to blame the curriculums. The problem I have, even with this awful, awful curriculum that our provincial government is proposing, is that it's sort of distracted a lot of people, even within the educational sector, from the fact that the curriculum wasn't that good in the first place. I mean, we've been using the same textbooks for high school for how many years? I graduated in 2017, I did high school, graduated in 2017. I remember talking to someone about 7 years older than me, and they said, "Oh yeah, I used that Social 30 textbook, or I used this or that textbook." There's a new edition, but it's all the same material, basically. That's a problem. With information moving as fast as it is right now, as fast as it has, exponentially increasing in its speed of innovation and discovery over the past, let's say 30 years, we need to constantly update these things. It is a very dire need that I think is also being ignored. Really, what I hope to do in my educational career is drive home that we need to seriously refresh some things. We need to seriousseriously reinvigorate the power of the educational institution, not just here, but generally in the West, because there's a similar trend throughout most of Anglo-America and much of Western Europe. Now, in terms of educational models, now a lot of people uphold the Finnish model. Finland, I keep using the wrong hand, it's mirrored. Finland is right there. A lot of people uphold the Finnish model, which is cool. It's a great model. Finland has the top students in the world, highest marks, the highest achieving students in the world. What most people forget is that wait a sec. You know where this educational system comes from? You know where it comes from? It's really interesting. If you go back and do some research, you know where it comes from? The DDR. This is East Germany. Comes from there. I gotta iron that later. Now, why was the system replicated by the Finnish? For very good reason. It's because it didn't place the ultimate good the ultimate goal of what it was doing. It didn't place that on the production of a commodity, that is labor. Because I've mentioned that education has become a form of commodity production, and that commodity is labor, the future labor force. It's because it placed it in the social good and the intellectual good of its people. Now, this is not to say that East Germany was some great country. I think it was pretty good. Had many problems. However, I think there are many things about this state that are worth emulating. That the overall sort of hegemonic nature, sort of the hegemonic imperative of this educational model was that of improving the intellect of the population, of the future generation, rather than producing labor, future labor. One more thing I want to mention before I go is that I want to distinguish this from Paulo Freire's work. Now, Paulo Freire was another Marxist, pedagogist. He wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's an okay book. I have some criticisms of it. Probably another one of these streams will be about that book and my criticisms of it, because I think that, well, it was written during the 70s. It's a little outdated, I think. Not that we should completely throw it away. However, a lot of what has happened technologically has sort of rendered a lot of its points obsolete. So I want to sort of distinguish myself from that. Paulo Freire was brilliant. I want to make that very clear. Very selfless man. Massive inspiration to me. And I really mean that. The other thing that I forgot to mention was sort of monopolization and monopoly capitalism and how it affects education. Now, you can see this most prevalently in prevalently, is that a word? You can see this in post-secondary education the most. You go on, let's say, JSTOR or EBSCO host or any peer-reviewed journal website, database, Elsevier, for example. Much of the articles are either locked behind paywalls or you need to log into a university account to be able to view them. JSTOR is pretty decent that way. You can get most articles if you have a university account. However, what I'm concerned about is that people who are not enrolled in universities, because let's remember, in Canada and in the United States, university is not free, and in many parts of the world it's not free. There's a significant financial barrier to entering educational institutions, which I will also address. There's when these things are behind a paywall or behind the paywall of a tuition, you're going to have far less people actually properly educated by not settled science. Settled science is kind of a misnomer, right? It's settled science is kind of an oxymoron. Science is never settled, but you're going to have people very ignorant to the sort of scientific consensus and the social consensus as well. You can especially see this with COVID, the fact that most of these people who are anti-vax, anti-mask, all of this stuff, they're not reading. They're not reading these articles from actual institutions, research institutions, from medical researchers. They're getting it off YouTube, or they're going to some alternative platform, which again ties back to this uphill battle that educational institutions must fight against people becoming disengaged from them. And so I want to give a plug before I go. There is this thing. It is brilliant, and I love it so much. It is called Scihub. I will type it. I will put it in the description. Scihub. I will put check out Scihub dot. It tends to be a lot of things, as I'll explain. Scihub is this great girl in Kazakhstan. Just this random, I think she's a neuroscientist, and she's very good with computers, clearly. She found a way to basically hack into a lot of these journal article databases and just proliferate all of the journals for free. Basically, what you do is you go and get this browser plugin. It's a Chrome plugin. Most people use Chrome. And you just put it on your browser, and then you can go on Google Scholar, and you can get everything for free. I've pretty much everything. I think I've only gone to one article where it didn't work, and I look at a lot of these things. Remember, I am a student, so definitely go and check that out. We need more people reading products of the scientific consensus rather than just drivel that comes out of popular culture. So, anyways, this was a bit long-winded. I am a little bit loopy. I've been studying all day, but hopefully this was somewhat enjoyable. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm doing okay now. Just kind of look weird. So, yeah. I will see you all in the next one. I don't know when. Maybe tomorrow.